As infants, we learn how to self-soothe. As we get older, we sometimes forget how to do this effectively. For example, comfort food is called that for a reason. Have you ever seen photographs of United States presidents comparing how they looked when they got elected to how they looked at the end of their 4 or 8 year terms in office? Whew. Every one of them has aged exponentially. Except Donald Trump, who sold his soul to the devil and was in some kind of self-preservation, I don't know, tanning oil paint on or whatever. But everyone else has aged exponentially, well beyond what might be expected to be a 4 or 8 year look in aging. Is it possible to do that job differently? With so much to worry about, so much stress? The day after Obama was elected in 2008, Alice Walker, author of The Color Purple, published an open letter to him. She wrote many things, including how he couldn't possibly understand what his election meant to black people of the southern United States. It's a moving and eloquent letter. The most intriguing part of it to me, however, was what she said to him about taking care of himself. She wrote, "I would advise you to remember that you did not create the disaster the world is experiencing, and you alone are not responsible for bringing the world back into balance." That's some advice we'd all do well to remember. She goes on, "A primary responsibility that you do have, however, is to cultivate happiness in your own life, to make a schedule that permits sufficient time of rest and play with your wife and lovely daughters," and so on. Again, advice that would be good for all of us to heed. After all, how like the presidency are our own lives in our own way? Everyone's life is filled with the day's imminent crisis and ongoing pressures. We decide to give in to the unwritten law that says those anxieties and pressures and demands must completely rule our existence, that there must be no time for a partner or our children or our friends, no time for what enlivens us, to be good to ourselves. But we have the power to take care of ourselves. We do have the power and the option to love ourselves, to consider ourselves worthy, to be successful at the job of working inside. That's within our reach, each one of us, if we decide to reach in and grasp it and practice it generously with ourselves. In recent years, working for social justice has been increasingly tied to taking good care of oneself and not forgetting to enjoy being alive and having fun and doing things that are healthy for you, that they're reciprocal responsibilities. When I was in seminary, I studied ethics with a virtue ethicist who named self-care a cardinal virtue, a bottom-line moral task, a positive quality of our character and personality on which all the other virtues, characters, and qualities we have hinge or depend upon. As equally important as the cardinal virtues named in classical philosophy or contemporary philosophy: justice, courage, loyalty, wisdom. Later in my life, when I was teaching ethics in a high school, I began my class with a whole big unit on self-esteem and self-care. What good did it do to discuss justice and loyalty and courage and right and wrong and good and evil and making good choices if we didn't understand a thing about the person who was making those choices and why? We owe it to ourselves to take care of ourselves and value ourselves, to assess ourselves honestly. It's an ethical obligation. It's a bottom line moral task. Yet we sometimes think putting others first is not only a moral value, but a religious value, sometimes an ultimate value. We become conditioned to put others first at the expense of ourselves, not in addition to ourselves. Harvard psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg did his doctoral work in Chicago, where he studied 72 middle and lower class boys of various ages in Chicago and their response to moral and ethical dilemmas. And from his study, he concluded that moral and ethical reasoning progresses in a measurable developmental pattern through various levels that begins with right and wrong being all about avoiding punishment, through right and wrong being about self-interest, then following social norms and obeying rules, and then keeping a social contract, and finally the highest form of ethics and ethical reasoning of having a principled conscience. All well and good. But one of his students, Carol Gilligan, proposed a feminist critique. And her book in 1982, In a Different Voice, recounted stories from the lives of women as they had to make ethical decisions. And she argued that Kohlberg did not question young women in his study. And when he did, they scored lower on his scale because he assumed all ethical decision-making was reason-based at all developmental stages, using some form of being able to weigh rights-based claims. But Gilligan's study led her to conclude that women made most of their ethical decisions not by weighing rights claims through different levels of developmental reasoning, but based on the strength of their relationships with the people involved in the decision, which also is a virtue, loyalty, fidelity. And she proposed what she called an ethics of care and found that developmentally, women seem to go through three stages, basing ethical decisions at first on care of others, then care of self, then an integrated stage of caring for self and others. Recently caught Carol Gilligan on NPR publishing an updated version of her book where she was talking about how this isn't just how women make decisions. Both men and women, everyone makes decisions based on relationships and ethics of care and on moral reasoning. It's all one big thing together. But what she did help us prove is that you really must care for yourself if you're going to take on the care of others and do it well. Healthy self-esteem does not allow you to become someone else's servant at the expense of everything else, but to live a life of service in balance with taking care of yourself. Somewhere in this big mix and jumble, all of us weigh justice claims and consider relationships, and it takes us down the road to being a more holistic self. And I want to emphasize that taking good care of ourselves isn't solely about eating right and staying hydrated and getting enough sleep and getting some exercise and having a therapist, a friend, and a small group ministry at church, see what I did there, to help you process things in your life. Those things are all important, don't get me wrong. But our focus on self-care also needs to be generous, overflowing, saturated with love for ourselves, above and beyond. We're worth it. Our generous self-care needs to include self-comfort, and I would say at times self-indulgence in the right time and place is also okay. Self-care means not just being good to yourself, but being kind to yourself, being compassionate with yourself, being able to love yourself not just in a quiet place by yourself, but out loud in the world, being okay with you. There's no greater gift you can give yourself than to care for yourself. Be tender to yourself. Do your best to make wise decisions for yourself. Hold yourself worthy. Say, "This is how I love you," to yourself. if you can't say, I love you to yourself, you certainly can't say it to someone else without as much depth and meaning as you can when you can say it to yourself too. You are worth your own best effort all the time. I want to recommend to you a few things to help you be generous toward yourself. One is self-compassion, another is self-comfort, and finally, self-extravagance. Self-compassion has to be part of the toolkit if you're going to take good care of yourself. In her book, Self-Compassion, Kristen Neff says self-compassion is being kind and understanding toward yourself when confronted with personal failings and flaws. We know this. Don't practice the negative self-talk. Rewire your brain by catching yourself in it and replacing it with encouraging and kind words for yourself. Perhaps try to make this a more daily practice. Stand in front of a mirror and tell yourself how awesome you are, how beautiful you are, how smart you are, how loved you are, how wonderful you are, how much of a badass survivor you are. I think Jeff has the ability to help you look at yourself right now. So here you go. You're going to be on the screen. Take a look at yourself. Tell yourself, how awesome are you? Go ahead. Look at yourself. Tell yourself. How beautiful are you? Tell yourself you're so beautiful. Tell yourself you're a badass survivor. You've made it this far. You've done it. Look how awesome you are. We laugh, but we don't do this enough, everybody. It's okay. We know the difference between this, right here, what we're doing, and somebody being just really full of themselves and missing the reality of themselves. We know all too well our warts and our failings and our mistakes and our flaws and the things we're not great at. We know all that stuff. And still, you're awesome. We don't do this enough. You don't need to be perfect to be awesome and beautiful and smart and wonderful. Perfect is the enemy of done. It's the enemy of done when you're trying to get the church newsletter finished. And it's the enemy of done when you're working on yourself as a person through your whole life. We're never going to get through life in any kind of reasonable or sane way if we're always trying to be perfect. It's the number one enemy of done, finished, okay, enough. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be you. That in itself is a hard enough task for all of us. Self-comfort goes along with self-compassion, and maybe it happens first even. You know, making yourself a cup of cocoa or tea and getting a cozy blanket and a good book and a comfortable chair is not self-care. That's self-comfort. But that's an important component of self-care. We all need to remember to develop ways and remember the ways we self-soothe. As infants, we learn how to self-soothe. As we get older, we sometimes forget how to do this effectively. For example, comfort food is called that for a reason. It soothes us. Some things that work for me when I need to comfort myself are taking a walk, especially with the dog, going outside, just to sit, stand, breathe, or look at the sky. When I was training to be a spiritual director, we had this one thing we read, a book called 3 Deep Breaths, about the incredible benefits of not just a meditation practice, but even the simplest little thing of just taking 3 deep, clear breaths to stop your rolling through anxiety or self-doubt or getting down on yourself or being in a tough situation. It sounds simple enough, but when I remember to do it, it really works for me. Meditation's great, but it may not be everybody's thing. I play guitar when I need to self-soothe. I got stressed out the other day working on this service. I stopped, I picked up my guitar. Next thing I knew, it was an hour and a half later. I'm like, crud. Didn't even notice oh, great, now I'm not done the service and I got to go do something else. Great. But it worked in the moment. I've learned to ask for a hug. I've learned that I do better in general when I journal, especially in the morning. And one of my favorite things to do to calm myself and soothe myself is listen to music. If you like music, it's one of your things, and you all who like music know that. I want to suggest that you make a menu of things that comfort you and that you can do when you need to calm and soothe yourself. Actually make a list. Actually write it down. Put it on a file on your computer. Put it on a piece of paper on the refrigerator. Refer to it. I don't want to encourage you to engage in a habit of being self-pitying, but I want to follow one of my colleagues and friends, Reverend Joanna Fontaine Crawford, and tell you that every once in a while, not only is it okay to, but you need to throw yourself a pity party. Sometimes it's just needed. So the way she suggests doing this is you gather your favorite foods, make sure they're on hand. Make sure you have access to some of your favorite feel-good or feel-bad and make you cry movies. Plenty of tissues, a poundable pillow, and the space and people you need to be included in this to party with you or not, as the case may be. Indulge the whole night. Overeat. Binge watch. Complain out loud. Yell at people who are not there, obviously. But then go to bed. And when you wake up, look in the mirror, practice some self-compassion, and get on with it. You're allowed one pity party, she says. Go for it. Do it right, and then get on with it. I want to encourage self-extravagance. Be overflowing with yourself. Tell yourself, daily affirmation, that you are enough. Again, this can't be repeated enough. As Brene Brown puts it, we live in a culture of never enough. Never good enough, skinny enough, popular enough, never enough Twitter followers. There's only one way out of scarcity, and that is enoughness. At some point, we need to say enough. I am enough. What I'm doing is enough. It's about waking up in the morning and saying no matter what gets done and how much is done and how it's done, I'm enough, and I'm worthy of belonging and love and joy. Remembering that you're enough is a way to practice abundance. Abundance being the opposite of scarcity. Now, one can think of abundance in a kind of magical thinking, fairy tale wish kind of thing. That if you just have enough positive thoughts and think everything's going to be good and enough it is. That's not how it works. Abundance is an attitude or a mindset or an approach that involves teaching ourselves to change our conscious thinking. Not because positive thoughts bring us wealth or love or cure sickness. They don't. But because positive approaches help us do our best in whatever situation we're facing. The abundance mindset does not negate the need to be a good steward of resources or ignore the severity of one's situation, financially, health-wise, or otherwise. But abundance is a cycle, a pattern that emphasizes what's going right, emphasizes what's working currently, and what we have currently instead of what we're lacking. instead of focusing on what's going wrong, instead of focusing on what doesn't work and what we lack. That's scarcity. An abundance mindset follows a loop, and it begins with gratitude. Genuine gratefulness at what we actually do have and who we are. Enough. We're enough. An attitude of gratitude leads to more peace of mind. Again, think of the Buddhist practice of stepping off the treadmill of constant desire and constant monkey mind. Having more peace of mind, we tend to make better choices when we're not anxious. Making wiser decisions fosters positive outcomes, and then when things go well, there's more to be grateful for, and the cycle goes around. It's not a guarantee we'll make more money or be more successful or improve our love life, but it does maximize our chances with working with what we have. We may not get everything we want, but chances are better that we'll at least get what we need. We'll have enough. Abundance doesn't focus on having a surplus. It focuses on having and being enough. The scarcity loop, by contrast, is the opposite. It begins with fear of what we lack, what will happen because we lack something, and what's missing. This leads to anxiety. Because we're anxious, we make poor choices. The poor choices make bad outcomes, and then it goes on and on the other way. You are enough. You're good enough. You're strong enough, wise enough. You're lovable, important, beautiful, and amazing. Even with all your flaws, all the mistakes you've ever made, all the rough spots you have, had, and will have, all your fear, all your doubt, everything you don't like about you, you're still awesome, and you're enough. Late Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh says, "We are each our own one true home." And he defines home as the place where loneliness disappears. When we're home, we feel warm, comfortable, safe, and fulfilled. Coming home to ourselves, he says, begins with mindfulness. In particular, paying attention to one's breathing in order to become present in the body, present with the earth, present in the moment. And this type of awareness is liberating, allowing us to recognize, accept, befriend, and finally release pain and anger and suffering and anxiety. These feelings are like a small child tugging at our sleeve, he writes. Picking them up and holding them tenderly, acknowledging our feelings without judging them or pushing them away, embracing them with mindfulness. The totality of who we are. It's homecoming. In learning to be gentle with our own feelings, we learn to be more gentle with the feelings of others. And then we're able to help them come home to themselves too. A liberal religious approach to being generous with yourself begins with the refutation of that heavy-duty sin and guilt trip that Pema Chodron talked about. Liberal religion begins with the idea that all human beings are sacred and holy. This morning, my wife, who's an Episcopalian Christian, will celebrate with her congregation All Saints' Day. They move it to the Sunday after now, I'm told. I don't know. And All Saints' Day is a Christian celebration that gets to the heart of what it means to be a universalist. We're all holy. We're all saints. We're all the ministers and prophets. Saints are not perfect examples of human piety. Perfect is not what we're after. Perfect examples of being human don't exist. All of us are holy. We are holy ones, saints. We're enough. Thanks a lot for watching this video. It would help me out a great deal if you liked the video to give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others. Maybe ring that notification bell so you can be informed when we put out other videos like this. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.